Hi there, I'm Richard Hill, the host of eCom at One, and welcome to episode 199. In this episode, I speak with Mike Whitby, Senior Brand Manager for the likes of Lyle Scott, Asics, and many other big brands over the years. We cover a lot in this one. The biggest shift happening in retail right now, Mike's take on brand versus performance, and how can businesses do brand building well? How can retailers use community building to increase their sales and improve loyalty? And Mike's advice on brands that want to understand their customers much better. And of course, so much more in this one. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this episode, so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Now, let's head over to this fantastic episode. Hi, Mike, and welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm really well. But apart from the little bit of flu today, actually, but hopefully my producer, editor can do his magic, and I won't sound too croaky on this one. But yeah, great. Well, nice to have you on the show. I know we've been trying to organise this one for a while, so thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
I think let's get into it. So I think before we get into what you're doing right now, I think it'd be great for you to step through your history in the e-commerce space and how you really got into e-commerce and bring us up to date.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for having me on as well. It's it's nice to finally get it sorted and come and have a chat. I'll give you a whistle stop tour. I've been working in some form of brand and marketing now for about the last sort of 13, 14 years. And obviously most of that time has been spent in the e-commerce space naturally. I've worked for some pretty big brands in terms of large businesses like Asics, as an example, the sportswear brand. Started back there in 2013, working in sort of more trade marketing and those types of things. That was my first sort of exposure to the world of e-commerce and consumer goods. I then sort of moved back down from Manchester down to London and moved into Lyle Scott, the men's clothing brand, which I'd had a long-held affinity for, having grown up playing golf and various other activities, and obviously therefore was very familiar with the brand. You'll see probably a little bit of a similar theme here in terms of working for some of those sort of more heritage brands that I've had a connection with when I was younger. So worked there in sort of, again, a wholesale marketing, trade marketing capacity to start with, and then moved into a marketing managerial role for a period of time. Probably definitely wasn't ready for that step in my career at that point, but the opportunity presented itself, and I was working with someone that had a bit of belief in myself, and yeah, that was a role where I learned a hell of a lot. And that's where I sort of got my first sort of, I guess, real leadership experience and exposed to the e-commerce world. And then I moved to a fairly well-known business called Pentland Brands, which own the likes of Berghaus, the Speedo, and Mitre, and Kickers, and a few other brands. They license all of those businesses. And I worked on the Kickers brand for the majority of the time that I was working in the business, in a senior brand manager capacity. I also worked on Mitre, worked on Berghaus, and a few other brands while I was there as well. And then more recently, sort of in the last few years or so, I worked for some startups. So Pangaea, well-known clothing brand, and what, to be fair, just a full lifestyle brand within the sort of sustainability space and sort of where brands are going in the future. So that was a great challenge and a really interesting opportunity, and a business which has a very interesting way of working and an interesting identity for what a brand can be. So I learned a hell of a lot during that experience. It was there for about a year or so. And then recently I worked for a company called With You, which is in a digital fitness tech space. So portfolio business again, have With You, which has been an app which has been in existence for a while now, similar to the likes of Fit and Peloton, those type of apps. And also a huge joint venture with Sky called Movement, which is the leading sort of fitness proposition on the Sky ecosystem. So really interesting business, great set of people again, and learn a hell of a lot within the tech space compared to some of the places I've been in before. So yeah, really interesting sort of venture, and now I'm taking a bit of time to look for the right sort of next step, really. So yeah, that's a bit of a whistle stop tour, I guess, of where I've been and what I've done.
That's a list and a half, isn't it? Especially, I like if you'd been on an episode probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I'd have had my Lyle Scott golf tee on. I wear that quite a lot, actually. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. As you can imagine, my wardrobe is basically full from of Lyle Scott, of all Asics and of Kickers and all the brands that I've.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So,
is that basically how you decide where to work next? Now, what gear do I need next?
I've been pretty fortunate now to do that over the career. So it's not had to pay for many clothes over the years or shoes, which is good.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it? Yeah, that's very nice, very nice. So obviously some amazing experience there, in retail and the high street, and obviously on the e-commerce side, and we'll come to all that, but obviously dealing with, big brands, also, up and coming brands, different budgets, seen an awful lot, dealt with, no doubt, a lot of agencies, in-house, the whole mix of things. So we'll get into that. But what's maybe the biggest shift you're seeing right now in retail? What's some of the biggest changes you've seen in the last, now with what's happening?
Yeah, I think one of the, and it's a really nice shift as well. I think it's probably born off the back of everything that's happened in the last few years. I'm sure every episode you've had for the past few years has probably talked about COVID in some capacity, but obviously pre-world and post-world from that occurrence, it's been a very interesting situation. I think the bit that I think is coming back now, which I'm a big fan of, is the in-person elements being brought back into building communities and building a culture around brands. So I think obviously, digital and e-commerce is going to be, is always going to be the focus. It's the way people shop now. It's the way people engage with, brands, with individuals. It's the way it is. But I think I've seen recently a large shift back to more in-store elements, more in-person elements, building communities with on a more local level. Obviously, living in cities and things like that gives you a bit more access to those things. But I think that's the biggest shift I'm seeing at the moment is a willingness for consumers to go back to doing those types of things as well as the online element.
I think that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think a lot of focus. So, if you're pure ecom, and maybe don't have those stores, but then what about those brands that are maybe looking to open their first stores or are at the start of their store journey? I know obviously Gymshark, for example, I think they're a couple of years now into their London store. I think another store I believe is opening or opened. The brands that are looking at maybe opening a store, what would you say to those guys?
Yeah, I think I would separate them out. I think it's obviously an advantage to have your own store, and it creates a really nice consumer journey in terms of holding an event there. You don't have to push your agenda to sell products at the same time. It's naturally in that environment, so it has that advantage. But I think what you have seen, Gymshark's a great example. I know a few people over there, and what they've done is fantastic in terms of partnering with businesses like gyms as an example, which obviously very closely relate to the space, and therefore they use their physical spaces to engage with an audience. I've just seen another young brand, Tana, started by Grace Beverley, very well known within that sort of younger audience in the sports and fitness space, but they've just done a pop-up in New York recently as well. So a lot of the brands that I'm seeing do stuff like this don't necessarily have a store there. They're engaging with other businesses or other things in spaces that relate directly to their field. So I think that makes it really organic as well, and a really interesting sort of opportunity.
I guess consumers get to sort of feel, taste, I guess, that brand, aren't they? They're possibly bought into that brand because they've bought the products, great experience online, the social media side of things. But, we talk about Grace Beverley. But then if they're then opening a store, or quite often, as you alluded to, opening a pop-up, and testing, and obviously be able to travel around different areas and different parts of the world to do a pop-up. It's quite a clever sort of, I wouldn't say low cost, but it's obviously a lot lower cost to do a pop-up than it is to open a store on Regent Street or whatever it may be. Big commitment. But yeah, I do. I mean, we've talked about retail quite a lot in the last few episodes, and I think that there seems to be a resurgence of retail, that I'm feeling and seeing, but the brands that seem to be doing it really well, obviously connecting the two. Have you got any good examples of, the high street and the e-com side, sort of connecting the two really well?
Yeah, I think I was actually just going to mention it anyway, and I think we'll talk probably a bit more about this, but New Balance have just, I can't remember exactly where it is. It's in the States. They just launched a new store concept, which I saw recently, and that was a great example where I saw a post from their chief marketing officer as well, and talking about the spaces need to reflect your brand and what you're trying to convey to your consumer, and it's experiential. Businesses are, brands, especially in the spaces I've worked in, aren't building stores now just purely to be transactional. You come in, you find a product, you search for your size, and you go. It's very much about doing something whilst you're there, experiencing what the brand are about, trying to get across that as a brand as well. So I think that the New Balance example is a great one. I think that there's been many brands over the course of the last few years that I think have done some really great stuff depending on what space you work in. I think the name eludes me off the top of my head right now, but there is a skincare brand as well that started putting sinks obviously into their environment a number of years ago now, and that instantly gave the consumer, like you said, the opportunity to touch and to feel the products and to really give it a go before they buy it themselves. So I think it's definitely the way things are going, and personally, if I do go out to a store now, with the ease of shopping online, you want it to be something different. You don't want to just go in there and do the same thing you could do online. So.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I think that the time this last year, definitely more so, the retail piece. I think I'm thinking about some of the things as a family that we've bought recently or we're buying recently, and going to doing the the research online, absolutely having a look, but then going and touching and feeling and trying and seeing, and that experience. I think we think about the brands that do that really, really well. It's obviously it's maybe not. I think people that are listening now, it's easy to say that when you're a Gymshark of the world, and you've got those budgets. But for those companies that maybe are very much focused on the performance marketing side, the paid ads and the paid media, they're thinking, well, investing in brand, it's an obvious question. Yes, you need to, but what would you say to those companies that are pretty much completely focused on performance marketing? What would you say to those guys?
Yeah, look, I think it's it's obviously been a part of my career, and I personally love the brand building side of things, and obviously done various elements in that space. But I think that they need to come together. So if you create a really, really compelling brand, and great storytelling, and it's something that people will engage with, but then you don't give them the opportunity to drive them through that marketing mix, you're not going to get them into your funnel, and you're not going to sell them your product, whether that's a digital product or a physical product. But I think that if you're neglecting brand, you're not thinking about things in a long term manner. So I think performance marketing is very easy to read, it's very easy to understand, it's very easy to see whether you're doing what you're trying to do, whether you've spent the money on the right thing, which is great. And us as marketeers, we're always looking to try and make everything we do as readable as possible and as KPI driven as possible. So I think that the brand piece is difficult to measure at times, and it takes quite a while sometimes for it to come through. So, but I would say, you need to be looking at both. I personally believe that the brand piece is about a long-term brand health and around long-term brand building. And then, to your point a second ago, Richard, I don't think every brand has to do that in-store piece or that in-person element.
Yeah.
Some brands are very, maybe more so in the FMCG space, or in other spaces are very transactional. If you look at the likes of Amazon, if you go onto there to buy a product, you'll tend to go onto there, type in what you're looking for, and you will buy the cheapest one with the best rating, right? So it's I think I'm referring more here to those brands you want to build a connection with that actually. You share the same values as them, you share the same ideology as them, and their products therefore fall off the back of that as well. So I think that's kind of where my stance is in terms of I think both are very important, but personally I have a big affinity to brand.
It's getting that mix, isn't it? I think it is. It's not like there isn't a perfect. We're very much on both sides of both sides, but we spend 40% of our business behind the podcast is performance marketing agency. Very much paid ads is 40%, and SEO is 40%. So they're both performance in a way. But yeah, I mean, what a let's say you're listening to this episode now. And Mike, you're obviously work for some big brands, probably, we've got brands of all sizes listening. I know we have, brands doing 10, 50, 100 mil listening to the majority of the episodes. Let's say we're sitting here and we're a £10 million turnover brand or eCom store. We haven't got a store. We're probably not going to build a store or create a store. What are some very specific activities around brand that you would recommend for that type of business?
Yeah, I think understanding who you are and building a strategy, a brand strategy. So it's probably the starting point I would talk to you. So, a lot of what we've spoken about already is how you execute that brand strategy. And actually, even just doing the brand strategy work up front is the most important part. So, most people will have a great product. They'll, if they're forming a business, whatever the product is, they'll have created the product off the back of that. They'll be making it and reiterating it and making it as best as possible. And lots of businesses I come across these days are so product focused. That's great because ultimately that's what people are buying and that's what people are, that's what they're trying to sell to make money. But at the same time, I think understanding, what your brand stands for, what your values stand for, the why question, which I'm sure people have probably said on this podcast before, but understanding as a business what your why is and why you're doing that thing or why you're selling that thing or that service is incredibly important. So I think you build your brand off the back of that. So looking at, your very visual things like your visual identity and your tone of voice, I think is if people haven't done that, that can have such an impact on people. Yeah. I think people, a really good example of that is, I don't know if you've ever seen that there's a documentary series on Netflix called Abstract. And it's relating to this field and it talks through people that have sort of the working more creative spaces and one of the episodes or a couple of episodes are dictated around fonts. And it's just really interesting that I don't think people understand fully how a font can make you feel or act as a person. And it's such a subliminal element of a brand just in our everyday lives. So I think, there's definitely really obvious things you can go and do, and you can work with agencies to do that. You can hire specialists to do that. To look at your brand identity and your tone of voice, looking at how you create your imagery, how you want to sound, the words you use, how much Gen Z language you use. I'm sure many of the people listening to this and yourself have seen the recent videos of I saw a 70-year-old B&B business recently that obviously have someone young in their family thinking about the marketing and they're making their older generation use Gen Z language to react. We've done that TikTok as well. But it's a great example of you've got to play into trends and bits and pieces if it's a relevant target consumer, but at the same time that gives you license to be like, yes, we are that type of brand that would use that kind of messaging or not. So I think really understanding your brand strategy, your identity, your tone of voice, those things is really important. But then also building out your consumer and really understanding who your consumer is. So getting into the likes of, where they shop, how they shop, what kind of level of income they have, where they spend their time and energy. Are they reading physical newspapers still, or in the large majority of instances, are they getting their news from TikTok or from? So it will depend on your consumer. But if you get a really granular level of detail around those things, I think that is a great starting point for people to really understand brand and how they bring, how they make decisions throughout all the rest of their business to taking that into consideration.
Yeah, I think that piece that I think a lot of companies that are on this sort of, I guess it depends on the size of the business, but I see it time and time again, where we'll get, businesses that are doing 10, 20 mil, but their branding and their tone is quite frankly shocking. And I think it's quite often, it's just, they've grown maybe at such a rate, and they started where they started and they've got a very successful business, but they, I think, undervalue that piece that you've just explained, or they're just not maybe come round to the fact that they need to invest an amount, into that, workshop in the tone of voice, the branding, pay for branding. It's like, you see it all the time. I'm a massive advocate of branding and paying for brand and investing in an external team. And, if you're sitting there as a founder thinking, and you may be on the fence about, investing with an external brand team, what are some of the things you would say to them about maybe finding a team to work with to help you with the branding?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I'd always look internally. So I think, a really good example, the last business I was in, very fortunate that one of the founders that I work really closely with and report into, she had a fantastic background in the brand and marketing space, and we dovetailed quite nicely in terms of my experience as well, and actually we were able to build a lot of those elements ourselves over a period of time, and it doesn't take long at all. So I think if you've got people internally that have a bit of experience in that space or a bit of an interest in that space, I think you can do a lot of these things. There's if you're using Miro boards and various other things, there's lots of templates to just sort of walk you through the process. So I would definitely recommend that as a starting point. That will only give you so much. I think you obviously then need to come to businesses such as yourself or agencies that have an experience in doing this, understand the nuance of it, understand how it interrelates to the rest of the business as well. What you don't want to do is work with an agency that just look at you very objectively, look at your product and look at the one brief in a very short time they get with you and build something off the back of that. They need to be integrated into the business. They need to understand how it's going to interact with all the elements of what you do. So I would say, but again, Dave, there's lots of branding experts out there on LinkedIn and stuff now that I would recommend people, maybe follow or have a little look at. And there's lots of content out there on various different platforms as well. So I think that's a really good starting point. And you're from there, I'm sure you'd be able to connect with an agency like yourselves to really drill down into more detail on that.
So that's sort of like the brand itself internally, but then obviously understanding your customers, that's what I think is the other side of the coin, but obviously it all fits together. What are some of the things you've done over the years with the different brands you've worked with that have been successful that you could share if you're allowed? That the brands you've worked with have sort of done to understand customers better.
I think it's twofold for me. I think you and I tend to find that most brands do one or the other at the moment already. And I think the starting points there are looking at a larger business or agency that you can work with, the likes of Kantar as an example, that really understand market data and they have a lot of information at their disposal, and they can really help you to understand the opportunity in the market and the gaps in the market and perhaps the products that you could bring to the fore that would help you to close some of those gaps and to obviously profit off of that. I also know that there's obviously various different forms of Kantar across different industries as well. So, that's just one that I've used many, many times before, WGSN, and there's several. I also think then just talking to customers. So, I think it goes back to the conversation we had before. So often, I speak to people that work in various businesses that have never spoken to someone outside of their own teams that have used their product or have bought their product. So I think it's really important to run some small workshops, to send out surveys via a CRM platform, whatever it may be, to gauge an in-person conversation, but also a larger sort of survey-based response from people that have bought your product or even considering your product. They might not have yet bought from you. But doing those kind of two approaches, the more in-person, more physical, more direct approach with directly speaking to customers, and then also understanding potential customers through an external source like a Kantar, whatever it may be, I think that they're both incredibly important to understand your current consumer and also potential consumers. So, yeah.
You make it sound so easy, Mike. I mean, I think ultimately it isn't that difficult, is it? Though, really, I don't think. I think so many founders are so wrapped up, in and senior management in acquisition, where everything just take a step back and speak to your customers.
They're more
sounds.
Sorry, Rich, I was just going to say, I think they're more often than not, they'll tell you how to acquire them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think it's, I've taken part in a couple of these conversations with people. I work really closely with an agency that I've worked with for years. They were reaching out to people that drank whiskey, and that was something that appealed to me, and I know that one of the founders really well, and he said, would I take part in it? And I answered questions for them, and I was basically telling them, got paid a small amount of money, not much at all, as a lot of these surveys are, and I was able to tell them exactly how to go and get me basically as a consumer. So and that's then half an hour's interview or whatever that they've got access to, that they can refer back to, and if you do that a few times with a few different people, you'll get the answers quite often that you're looking for. So I think it's so interesting.
It is. I mean, I mean, slightly different, but obviously as an agency behind the podcast, we have somebody in our business that speaks to every one of our customers after they've been with us, 3 months, a year, 2 years. And it's something we implemented all year, 5 years ago. And the feedback we get, because you can be blinkered, especially as the founder, I try not to be, absolutely open-minded to any type of feedback, but it's been really eye-opening. Couple of bits of information. I'm not going to share any specifics, but but it's great. It's great to do that process.
Now, you might be looking for an SEO boost, a down-to-earth digital PR campaign to share your story, or maybe just some straightforward technical help to amp up your performance. Now, that's where eCom Now comes in, a partner that's all about making things easier for your online store. Our services cover everything from creating professional content for your e-commerce categories to refining your product descriptions. Now, whether you're just starting out or have been in it for a while, we're here to deliver real, impactful results that add to your bottom line without unnecessary commitments. You can order one-off or multiple projects with a quick turnaround. Simply choose what you need.
So community building, I think the brands that seem to be doing well, the brands that customers are coming back for more and more, seem to be investing more and more in community. Obviously, in your experience working for a lot of the high street, what have you seen around the brands that are doing well with building communities around their stores and physical stores?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting piece. I think the loyalty piece and in generating brand advocates is the most important piece. So, if, no matter what industry you're in, whatever product you're selling, you're looking for them people to come back and again, and to come to you as a brand for, I'll speak specifically to some of the space I've worked in, but if you work for a fashion business or a sports brand, you're looking for people to come back in and buy other products for other sports from you, as well as, just the space that you bought from them originally. So I think, it's about creating storytelling and the connection with consumers, whether that's physically in communities, through in-store events like we talked about already, or whether that's through creating, affinity with those consumers digitally online as well through, various different forms. So there's WhatsApp communities and stuff out there now. There is, various different forms at least, these things are taking. So, ultimately it's the best form of marketing, in my opinion, because once you create a brand advocate, which is obviously the hardest thing to do and the thing that we're all striving towards, you've got a consumer that's actively talking about you and doing some marketing for you without you paying for them. And they are, it is the strongest form of marketing as well. I'm sure we were all familiar with, asking friends, family, for recommendations on things. I've just done it over the weekend when we were out with some friends and they had something in their house, which I saw, which I loved. And, instantly like, yeah, ever since you've got it, we've loved it, so, I'm now going to go out and buy one of those things as well. So that company has not spent a single penny, but they've generated enough, love and passion for that product, whether that was just purely through the product itself or through.
What was it? Are you going to share what it was, Mike?
Oh, so, it's quite an interesting one, really. It's to do with kids-based stuff. So one of my best mates has got a couple of young kids, and I've got a couple of young kids as well. Mine are a few years younger. So it's effectively a sand pit, which sounds quite menial, but when you dive into this world of kids' toys and other bits and pieces, there's all sorts of stuff out there. But I'd had a little look online before and sort of rebuffed my attention away from that space for a while. But this was quite impressive in terms of the cost of it and the build of it and the purpose of it and how it sort of taught the kids and other bits and pieces. So yeah, very menial item. As a lot of these things normally are, but it was they'd had a really positive experience with that particular product for a while. So I think building that loyalty piece through communities is so important. I think like we talked about before, there's various brands that have done that really well, like Gymshark and other brands in that space. I think that the advocacy piece just can't be underestimated. I think if you're able to do that, you're a long way to success.
So is there maybe a couple of things you've seen? Obviously, building the community, I say it as a phrase, dead simple, build that community. But ultimately, sitting here listening to this episode as a brand that want to, retain, want to build loyalty, are there anything specifically very actionable that you would recommend to the listeners that they Because I think typically what can happen is people will go away and maybe get a little bit stuck on some next steps.
Yeah.
For building loyalty. So, ultimately there's different ways to build that community, whether that's, through social media, whether that's through email, whether that's through, obviously there's, connecting it all and connecting the omni-channel and connecting everything. But then, you might get that first, second, third order, but then ultimately things can get a little bit disconnected, I think, quite often with brands after those maybe 2 or 3 orders. Yeah, we've done a good job. We've now got that person to buy 2 or 3 times, but hang on a minute. Have they recommended to 10 people? Have they bought 10 times? That's the ultimate goal, maybe. Yeah. How do we really, really nudge those first orders into absolute sort of brand ambassadors and multi-purchasers and advocates?
Yeah, I think really practically, you're right. I think, obviously these spaces we're talking about are so vast and so large that it's sometimes hard to figure out where you start. And I think, first and foremost, I think, every business should look at what they're doing currently and do they have a problem in this space, or is it something they can improve on? And I think 99% of business I've seen can definitely improve on this space at least. So I think, looking at, I'll come back to some of the brand elements perhaps, but some of the more practical things, looking at your CRM process and your CRM flows that you've got in place is so important. So I think, I have a couple of email accounts that I look at fairly regularly, and I'm sure most people do. And, the amount of, for use of a better word, crap that I see come through, and that I obviously then unsubscribe from, or whatever it may be. It completely instantly disengages me from the brand, and I may have bought from them before or expressed an interest to buy from them, but I'm instantly now withdrawn from that. So I think you have to be, with your storytelling through your CRM process, you have to be organic to yourself. You shouldn't be doing stuff that isn't who you are, doesn't stick to the values you're trying to endorse. But I think you should look at how regularly you're communicating with your consumers through processes like that. Are you talking to them enough? Are you talking to them too little? Some of the brands I engage with the heaviest, I maybe only get 1 email from them a month or less than. So I think, those sorts of things are definitely worth looking at. I think also, as part of that process, we implemented it in the last business I was at, and, you can obviously incorporate into other elements through social and things as well, but actually asking your consumers that have bought from you to review your product. So, I recently worked, like I said, in a digital fitness brand, and therefore, obviously, we wanted, ratings for us effectively through app stores. And, you have to hit a certain threshold to be able to do certain things as well as a brand and a business. And so, you want to drive that, obviously, that rating up as high as possible with as many reviews as possible. So, funnily enough, as soon as we actually asked people, we didn't actually give any incentive at all, and we just asked in the right way, in a message which conveyed the brand that we are, in a friendly tone, in a very, sort of open forum. We got a lot of responses back, and the largest amount we've had in a lot of time. I think quite a few people were skeptical to the fact that we would even get any responses. But people want to tell you if you're doing a good job on it, And don't get me wrong, we got a couple of bad reviews through that process as well, but that's also incredibly helpful.
Feedback.
Exactly. So I think, doing those couple of things, looking at CRM flows and looking at, what storytelling you're doing and how you build a longer term strategy. It doesn't have to all be about, you bought this recently, do you want to buy it again, or do you want to buy this next thing? It can also be about, you bought this recently, let's say a pair of boots, space I've worked in before. Yep. You bought these boots. Have you thought about how you're going to keep them lasting as long as possible, and you're going to keep the quality of the boots there? So have you therefore thought about this particular thing that we also sell that helps you to, put a leather cleaner on your boots, whatever it may be. So I think, there's all sorts of things within that. And then also, that review piece, actually don't underestimate how easy it is to ask them to feedback to you. So.
Yeah. I think the UGC reviews, is such a simple ask, but the power of a video testimonial, in effect, or the power of a video example of the product being used. Obviously, think about your products, guys. If you've got videos of actual users, we've done a lot of episodes on specifically with reviews and the different review platforms, but it's such a big and simple win to get videos. Nothing better than going to a brand, looking at their product that you're potentially, or you as a customer, are looking to purchase, and other people are showing it off in their homes, on their bodies, on their cars, whatever the product is, and it's, that sort of media. There's so many wins, isn't there? That with that type of media, obviously you're generating unique content, you're generating you need content for the search engines, which, everybody wants to do better in the search engines. But ultimately, connecting your brand with users or customers that are potentially about to buy, because, that's me. That's the same. That's that. Oh, yeah. And it's quite straightforward. But if you're not asking, it's a simple ask, really, isn't it?
100%.
And for every 100 asks, you're going to get so much media back, so many reviews. Yeah, I think, just connecting those dots, isn't it, quite often?
For sure. I think, it's obviously a brand which a lot of us won't be able to relate to. And, they're obviously one of the biggest brands in the world, but there's a reason for it. They do it so well. But if you look at Apple as an example now, that they have a beta testing program that they offer out to, content creators and the likes. And all they're literally doing is giving them access to a product they're about to release a couple of weeks before they're about to release it, and they get so much content generated for free. So, I think it's a great example of a brand have built so much desire to get their hands on that product that they don't have to offer anything apart from early access. And quite often early access to a product is the easiest way to do it and the cheapest way to do it as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So that's also another. I think this is what you're saying, but also when you think about loyalty programs, you step through you've accumulated so many points in a loyalty scheme by doing X, Y, Z on social, by again, recommending 2-3 times. That, an idea could be as a loyalty program, it unlocks access to stock that nobody else has got access to, which is a lot of firms do that as well. If you think about what, certain products that you may have, the guys that are with us still, certain products that are going to sell out. But if you just reward potentially your VIP customers, it's another reason for them to stick around, another reason for them to buy again, because they're going to get access to the drop of X, Y, Z, or, it depends what industry you're in. But most industries, there's limited stock on certain lines, brands, it's different times of year, particularly, Christmas coming up. There's going to be shortfalls in certain industries, obviously definitely on branded products. Depends on the industry, but you can sort of work in the sort of drop stroke sort of where there's maybe shortfall in stock into your loyalty program, so you get access to that.
Yeah, completely. I think, another example which is very culturally relevant at the moment, is the stuff that's happened with Oasis recently. So, very different space and very topical, obviously. But you can do this retrospectively as well. I didn't bother because I knew that how difficult it was going to be. But I've got a few friends that signed into the platform, signed into their account on Ticketmaster, whatever it may be, and they effectively then wanted to, obviously buy a ticket at the point in time, weren't able to, and afterwards, after the fact, Ticketmaster have come back in and said, everyone that registered and logged into your account but weren't successful to get the tickets, you're going into a ballot to get this new date that's been announced. So, I think you can do this stuff after the fact as well if you're in such an industry that allows it. So.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shit show, but yeah.
Yeah, they made
I don't know if what.
I was going to say they made a not a great situation slightly better, I think, to some people.
Yeah. To be fair, we I guess I think we were 5 hours in the queue, got nothing, or got access to the 400 quid, 150 quid tickets. Yeah. But then my wife got in the ballot 2 weeks later, and and she got tickets, but only 2. So she's not taking me, which is a bit annoying, really. But
I think it does. And this is the thing. You couldn't, there was obviously a lot of damage done to some of those ticket providers during that period of time. But you can use some of these things to also repair some of that damage as well, a little bit in some respects, I suppose. Yeah.
So obviously you work with a lot of what I would call fairly well-known brands, and obviously you've gone into these brands with a lot of ideas, that you've, no doubt gained a lot of experience as you go through this journey working for a lot of top tier brands. But ultimately, somebody's got to make a decision in those businesses to agree with you, disagree with you, get you on board but I think as a business owner listening or a senior manager in a business, what advice would you give to those guys, when it's decision time? You've got to make a decision about implementing maybe something we've talked about. There's a lot of decisions to be made, isn't there, in any senior leadership position? What would you say to the guys that are sitting there with it's their call to make decisions? What would you say to those guys?
Yeah, I think taking a risk and standing out from the crowd is a really important aspect, and it's It's very simple, but it's a principle that I've always tried to adopt. I worked in a business a while back, and the CEO had come from a very different space and was quite a character, and it was in the fashion world, and he definitely didn't come from that space, but I learned a hell of a lot from him. And he talked about this, as cheesy as it may sound, this purple cow philosophy. If you look in a field and you see a purple cow, you're going to notice that cow compared to everyone else. So, if you do the same thing everyone else is doing, you're not going to stand out as a business. You're not going to necessarily grow unless your product is superior, and that takes a lot of work. And even then it might not happen. So I think, I think you have to take a bit of a risk. You have to take a bit of a gamble. I think if you're looking at, do I do brand? Do I do performance marketing? Do I do this? Do I do that? I'm obviously talking specifically to my space. If you're working in a startup, as I have done the last few years, or in a business where you've got a lot of things to do and not enough people or not enough time to do those things, I think you've objectively got to look at it and go, well, back to my values and what am I trying to do and what am I trying to achieve? And off the back of that will help you to inform what decision you make. I think I would always err with, if you're going down something which is very short-sighted and very short-term view, that may generate you sales right now. And if that's what you need to be able to not close the business, then do that, right? But at the same time, if you have the opportunity to, alongside that, supplement it with even a bit of very free, your own research, your own work on the brand piece to go alongside that, that's about longer term brand health, I would definitely advocate for it. So I think, ultimately you've got to make a decision. I think when people sit on the fence for too long, that ultimately is one of the things that causes problems. You've definitely got to look at things objectively, but you have to turn left or right. You can't, if you come to the end of a road, it's, to use a very simple analogy, but you've got to go one way or the other. And ultimately, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Richard, and for most people who listen to it, I've heard it in so many different books over the years and on podcasts and stuff, but you've got to make mistakes to learn from them. And a lot of the biggest things that I now take as valuable things that I can bring to a business and skills that I have been from the fact that I made mistakes along the way and I chose a decision that wasn't the right one. So, I think we live and we learn, and it's better to take that decision.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think as a leader, senior manager in any business, you've got to make a decision, and you won't get it right every time. That is reality. But if you're and ah for too long, obviously you're presenting, leadership to your team, you've got to really make a decision, so obviously you'll have ideally a certain amount of experience behind you and, the benefit of the experience and the knowledge around what that decision is likely to impact. There's obviously a damage limitation in there, but ultimately making those decisions, like you say, you've got to get on with it as you And, I think 8 out of 10, you may get right, maybe less, but still, you'd have tried things, and one or two of those things may really make a difference. I think if you were to stop and pause this episode right now, there's probably 2 or 3 key areas that I know 50% of the people listening will not be implementing. How many of you are really, have got a VIP tier in your loyalty program when they've ordered 4 things, 5 orders? Probably not many of you. Now, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to make a decision to implement that? You have to decide, don't you? After this episode, you're going to go back to the office and have a look at your Google shopping ads and carry on, or you're going to think, hang on a minute, let's step back over here, have a look at the loyalty. Well, Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I like to end every episode with a book recommendation. Do you have a book to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I've got a couple actually. So I think from the sports and sort of spaces I've worked in the past, there's a book called Shoe Dog, which is by Phil Knight, which one of the founders at Nike, and that was just an incredibly fascinating read for me as a long time fan of the brand and working in the space that I do. So if anyone has an affliction for footwear or for sports brands, I definitely recommend that one. It's been more of a fun read, but some insight in there too. And one actually which I very recently read, which and I've also listened to a couple of podcasts since that he's been featured on as well, is Rick Rubin's book, which is a creative act, a way of being. So I think it directly relates to what we were talking about a second, Richard, as well. I think it's a really fascinating read in terms of how we make decisions, how we think what we do, and how we should act as people, and how we can take a look at the creative process in a different way and how we can do certain things that really feed into that. But, one thing that he said, and it does relate directly to what we said, is, you should always take everything back to, is it right for me? A decision is only ever right for me. I can't, make a decision that's right for other people. I can, but I need a lot of data to do that. And actually, that I think that that process of always making a decision that is right for you and that feels right to you is incredibly important. So data and insight is one thing, but it's got to be the right thing in your mind's eye as well. So that book was really insightful in that space. So,
well, I've not heard of that one. I'll get that on the ordered after we finish. Fantastic. Really good book. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Those that want to find out more about you, Mike, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I'm obviously on LinkedIn. So feel free to drop us a connection over there, and I'd be more than happy to chat and have a conversation about any of those aspects we talked about today. But thank you very much for having me on as well, Richard. It's been a pleasure. And
thanks very much. Thanks for coming on the show. I'll see you soon.
Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers, Richard.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast, so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you on the next one.